CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Robin Dwyer.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. Leaving the Taliban behind, the first charter flight out of Afghanistan takes off from Kabul.
Building bridges out of BRICS. China's President Xi meets India's Modi at a virtual meeting as the BRICS summit begins.
Hard times for EasyJet. The airline's share price plunges more than 10% after it rebuffs a takeover bid.
And harnessing nuclear fusion, how the same reaction that powers the sun could save our planet.
Around 200 Americans and other foreign nationals have left Kabul airport on the first international commercial flight since the Taliban takeover of the country.
The plane from Qatar Air is heading for Doha in a deal between Washington and Afghanistan's new rulers. It's not known if those flying out are the same group that's been stranded at Mazar-e-Sharif airport for almost a week after chartered jets were apparently blocked from taking off.
Some of those who left on that flight have been talking about their experiences.
My name is Abdullah. I'm from Canada, so we have a flight today, and we are very happy that we've been helped with the Qataris, and this is a good humanitarian job from the Qataris government.
And as far as I know, we're going to Qatar, and then we continue our journey from there.
I've tried several times during the US evacuation process but failed to leave the country. But finally I got an email to reach Kabul airport today. So me and my sister are here, along with our documents, and then we'll leave to Qatar and then on to another country.
Well, for more on this, let's go to Kabul now and talk to Zamarialai Abasin. So, Zamarialai, what more do we know about who has left on these flights?
Hello, Robin. Well, the Taliban have already declared that they have no problem with anyone who want to flee the country, and the flights, when it's normal, they can go if they have passports and other related documents. We got the reports of the 200 Americans and also some other citizens of the foreign countries that departed from Kabul or Mazar-e-Sharif. Yet the Taliban have not said anything formally about this issue, but possibly it will continue. There was a formal meeting of the official of U.S., Mr. Blinken, visited Qatar and then met with the Qatari officials. So that was the result of those meetings, and the Qatari Airways will continue flights according to the more sources that have been in touch with from Civil Aviation Authority in Kabul. And also there are recent reports from the Civil Aviation Authority in Afghanistan that the Afghanistan aerial lines are now available and safe for any kind of flights through Afghanistan. So that's the recent, and possibly there are much more to come, since we got reports that around 1,500 Americans are still left in Afghanistan, which of 200 already left today. And we have, I've been in touch and contacting the Taliban, but they haven't said officially about this yet. Robin.
Zamarialai Abasin in Kabul, thank you.
Afghanistan was high on the agenda as heads of state from the world's leading emerging economies met over video link for the 13th annual BRICS summit. Thursday's talks marked the second year in a row that the summit was held virtually because of the pandemic. The discussions were chaired by the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi. China will host next year's summit, with Chinese President Xi Jinping telling leaders he's looking forward to working together more closely.
Next year, China will take over as the chairman of BRICS, and we will host the 14th BRICS summit. We look forward to working with our BRICS partners to deepen all areas of our cooperation and build a closer and more results-oriented partnership to meet our common challenges and create a better future.
Ravinder Bauer has more on the summit from New Delhi.
The theme this time is BRICS intra-cooperation for consolidation, consensus and also achieving certain goals which these countries have laid out. And Prime Minister Mr. Narendra Modi in his opening remarks clearly said that this bloc actually has been very influential in the emerging economies, and the need of the hour is to cooperate on all sides, all different aspects which impact the people of these countries. Mr. Xi Jinping added in his opening remarks, he thanked Mr. Narendra Modi and his government for fruitful arrangements, and he also mentioned the fact that this is a strong group which should cooperate and which has cooperated despite the COVID which we saw across these nations, especially India and China, being impacted due to COVID-19. Of course, lots of things are on the agenda today. They are going to talk about the most important thing, which is Afghanistan. The current situation in Afghanistan is going to impact the region. The discussions will, of course, span over various points of views, because there has been a little bit of polarization as far as the takeover of Kabul is concerned. But definitely, since these countries are, sure about cooperation and consensus, some consensus will arrive as far as that situation is concerned, because BRICS always wanted peace and development of the region, and that is why it is important to look at, terrorist movements from across the border, terror funding, safe havens. All these topics then follow, because with what has happened in Afghanistan, there is a fear that terrorism might rise, and so counter-terrorism has always been an important aspect of discussion between these countries.
Earlier, I spoke to Baswati Mukherjee, a former Indian diplomat. I asked her about India's priorities as it chairs this year's meeting.
The BRICS was set up as a grouping which would bring together leaders and countries with common perspectives, but sometimes different approaches to issues relating to both international peace and security, as well as economic issues and other issues. India's priorities have always been to try to forge a common ground between such important countries on both political and economic issues. And for this particular summit, the reform of the multilateral system, for instance, cooperating on counter-terrorism, discussing Afghanistan, and looking at how to manage the pandemic as hopefully it transforms itself from a pandemic to an epidemic, so that we learn to live with it without it disrupting our normal life, the global economic situation, hospitality sector, tourism, etc. So all these are issues which are high on India's agenda, and these are issues which are of common concern to the BRIC leaders. Some may have different perspectives. Indeed, some do, particularly on Afghanistan. But it gives us excellent opportunity to see where common ground can be found.
Well, as you say, the members having different perspectives on Afghanistan, but that situation obviously on the agenda. Do you think members are going to be able to find common ground on that?
You can well imagine that one of the issues high on the agenda was to share views on what's happening in Afghanistan. The Russians actually have voiced concerns which are quite similar to us in the bilateral meetings we've had, because the Russians are quite nervous of terrorists getting exported from Afghanistan through refugee flows into Central Asia and then on to Russia. So again, these are issues that India would discuss and would reach out particularly to China in the hope that the Chinese would be able to also see the issue from our perspective. Nothing is impossible in a summit of this kind, which is closed-door affair and where the leaders can talk frankly with each other on what is troubling them. And Afghanistan naturally is very high on the agenda.
And also on the agenda, as you mentioned, the pandemic. India was hit badly, of course, as were some of the other BRICS nations. How do you think they might collaborate on tackling COVID going forward?
Well, I think the entire world, including the United Kingdom, was hit by the pandemic. We were hit particularly badly in the second wave because of this Delta variant which came and which caused havoc because of the huge population we have and the special requirements for oxygen. I understand now the main priority, particularly in Africa, is to make vaccines available we would be in a position to be able to export vaccines only after December, when we hope that at least 85% of our huge population would have been vaccinated. That is of great, great importance to Africa. South Africa is on the table, and that would be, I presume, of great importance also to Brazil.
Coming up on CGTN, Chinese tech stocks continue to fall, with new curbs announced on gaming websites.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London, who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back. Remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms. On Smart TV or online, on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. We're on YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, we're available 24 hours a day on Freeview.
China's Producer Price Index, which measures the cost of goods at the factory gate, soared to a 13-year high in August. Costs rose 9.5% from a year earlier, up from a 9% increase in July. That's largely down to surging commodity prices as the economy emerges from the pandemic.
Shares in Chinese gaming and media stocks slipped on Thursday on reports that Beijing had halted approvals for new games. China's 2 leading gaming companies, Tencent and NetEase, were summoned for talks with regulators to profoundly understand the importance and urgency of preventing minors from online game addiction.
Shares in Chinese property giant Evergrande have continued to fall amid fears the company's about to default on $300 billion worth of debt. On Wednesday, the group saw its foreign credit downgraded by ratings agency Fitch after saying it was selling assets and cutting costs in a bid to attract new investment.
British supermarket Morrisons has warned that the UK's lorry driver shortage will raise prices for the rest of the year. It points to the lack of drivers, as well as higher freight charges and commodity prices. Driver shortages in the UK have led to some empty shelves in recent months.
Budget airline EasyJet has rejected a takeover bid, opting instead to raise $1.7 billion from shareholders to help its recovery from the pandemic. The bidder was reportedly Hungarian-based low-cost rival Wizz Air. EasyJet says the unsolicited bid undervalued the company and the bidder was no longer interested in a deal.
Well, shares in EasyJet plunged 10% following Thursday's announcement. Let's get more on this with Susanna Streeter. She's Senior Investment and Markets Analyst at Hargreaves Lansdown. Always good to see you, Susanna. Now, look, EasyJet's being coy about the takeover bid that's gone away, although the markets have their own ideas. I mean, the airlines have taken these steps to shore up its finances and said it isn't just for COVID stuff, but to help them grow. But might EasyJet get swallowed up by a competitor before it can partner up with anyone else?
There is a chance, of course, because of the pandemic effect, it is likely that we will see more consolidation in the airline industry, but whether or not EasyJet will be swallowed up or make perhaps a bit of its own, we'll just have to see. Now, there was intense speculation that it was a rival, Wizz Air, that came forward with this unsolicited offer, and as you say, they were rebuffed, and instead EasyJet has launched this rights issue, wanting to raise 1.2 billion from shareholders to help see it through the crisis, and also, as you say, potentially make changes to shore it up for future growth. That may include perhaps increasing the number of routes that it flies, because certainly its rivals have been doing that, Wizz Air and Ryanair. We'll have to see exactly how that money is spent, but there's without a doubt EasyJet has been going through a very tough time.
In which case, the only way is up. But look, there's been a lot of interest in UK companies at the moment. Morrison's, the supermarket, for one. So let's talk about them in the news today, because they're saying things are going to get more expensive with the UK's lorry driver shortage. But how much of a worry is that?
Well, yes, there was already some disappointment given the fact that actually their profits fell by 37%. There had been hopes that the worst of the COVID costs would be behind it. Not at all, really. And certainly in this first half, those costs really weighed heavily on the company, as did, of course, losses from the fact that it hasn't been able to open cafes in store, and fuel sales were very low as well. But now there is another challenge on the horizon. In fact, the supermarket chain, like many others, is already dealing with it. We're talking labour shortages, particularly the HGV driver crisis. But also there are bottlenecks throughout the supply chain, as we've been hearing. Wholesalers are saying that actually food prices are going to have to rise. And Morrison's has a very large wholesale business as well. So although for now much of the costs have been absorbed without passing on to customers, it's likely that prices will have to rise. And of course, when there's such competition for shoppers at the moment, that could make it more difficult for Morrison's at the time when, of course, there are private equity giants swooping on the company. I think Morrison's is going to want to get this kind of deal signed, sealed, delivered very soon before any of these supply chain issues become really large.
And they're going to want to make themselves look as good as possible. Let's talk about China's property giant Evergrande. I mean, they're riddled with debt, it's downgrades, shares tumbling. I mean, investors fear this could be catching, don't they?
Yeah, there is real fears of contagion. There are reports that, in fact, another Chinese property group, Fantasia, might be running into problems as well, with reports that actually its bonds aren't being accepted by a number of banks. Now, this is all speculation so far. There hasn't actually been confirmation of this, but certainly what's been happening at Evergrande really has sent jitters through the market. Shares have slumped again after 2 credit downgrades in as many days, amid concerns that it will default on parts of its massive $300 billion debt pile. And this is all because of changes within the Chinese property market. Prices have slumped around 20%. And really, although, of course, Evergrande could sell assets, are there going to be enough buyers out there with prices almost looking they are in free fall in some areas? So real worries about the possible spread of this crisis elsewhere.
What are investors looking for? I mean, if we look at European markets, you know, they've been flirting with 6-week lows after a really strong start to the week and a good run of things. They've got an eye on the data. All this data coming out rather weak, not surprising. So what do investors want?
Well, it's really difficult at the moment because there are 2 things going on. There is this economic recovery, of course, and we heard from the European Central Bank today that actually that recovery was pretty strong, and we've seen inflation rising as well. Now, that is good news, of course, in terms of the pandemic recovery, but then it also means that the European Central Bank is going to start recalibrating its massive bond buying programme. And given that the financial markets are pretty much hooked on this drug of cheap money, that will concern some as well, although, of course, it's not going so far as perhaps the US Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, and the Bank of England, who are likely to start tapering their bond buying programs. But in addition to this, there is this fear, of course, of inflation with all these supply chain issues lingering. So on one hand, we want to see economic growth and this rebound, but we don't want to see inflation running out of control. And that's the tricky situation central bankers have to try and deal with right now.
So inflation and tapering, those are the two words of the financial month. Thanks very much, Susanna Streeter.
Well, as we heard from Susanna there, the European Central Bank has announced it will put the brakes on the wave of stimulus measures it unleashed in response to the COVID crisis, becoming the first of the world's big three central banks to do so. Let's talk to Ryan Thompson in Frankfurt. So, Ryan, the ECB says it's recalibrating rather than tapering. So what does this mean? Decode it for us, please.
Hi there, Robin. Yeah, this is Madame Lagarde getting very technical. Perhaps it's to ease markets, perhaps it's just to differentiate from other central banks. But in the words of Madame Lagarde, she is sticking to her guns and saying the lady isn't tapering. That is the word that she said today during her press conference with journalists, a reference to Margaret Thatcher, of course. But what does this mean? Of course, purchasing of these assets was going on since March at a rate of about 80 billion euros per month. That's on top of 20 billion euros, which the ECB traditionally does. From going forward, once the ECB is able to calibrate exactly how much they want to reduce it, perhaps it's to 70, perhaps it's even lower to 60, they will gradually begin to lower this. But the important line to underscore here is it's just a recalibration. There's no end date in sight. You can take a listen to Madame Lagarde saying exactly her own words a little bit earlier.
We are recalibrating just as we did back in December and back in March. We're doing that on the basis of the framework, which is a joint assessment. So we look at the financing conditions, and we concluded that they remain favourable. And we do that on the basis on the inflation outlook. And as you rightly pointed out, our inflation outlook has been upgraded.
So, Ryan, how will the ECB convince investors that a slowdown in purchases is not a first step towards tighter monetary policy?
Well, I don't want to use this word too much, but recalibration is really the key word here. And analysts I've been speaking to today really see it as a continuing policy. They are not nervous because they know that the ECB Governing Council, which has been meeting for the past 2 days here in Frankfurt, took this decision with a unanimous opinion. They did the calculations, they looked at the inflation forecast, and they looked at the European economic outlook, and they know that things are right now where they want to be, especially this medium-term inflation figure, which is really what a lot of people have their eye on. They think that within the right amount of time, they will be able to reach the ECB target, which is at or near 2%, and things will be fine in terms of making sure that they are able to continue the bond buying without balancing out the markets to too much of a negative yield place.
Ryan, thank you. Ryan Thompson there in Frankfurt.
Shares on Wall Street have bounced on better than expected jobs data in the US. However, shares in top Chinese tech firms have fallen amid new measures aimed to stop youngsters spending too much time on gaming websites. Let's go to New York and join John Terrett. John, good to see you. Is it fair to say that everyone's got their eye on those jobs figures?
Well, they have, because tapering may be the key word in Europe at the moment, as you said just now. But here, it is also tapering and it's also jobs. And so we have job numbers for you today. And it's important to explain what these numbers are, OK? It's called the Jobless Report, comes out every Thursday. And it refers to the number of people signing up for first-time unemployment benefit as of last Saturday. So in this case, it's the 4th of September. And the number came in pretty good. It came in at 310,000. Now, we've been expecting, or Wall Street, these people here have been expecting 335,000. So that's about 25,000 fewer people signing up than had been anticipated. And it's a lot better than the previous week, which was the 28th of August, which was 345,000. So there you go. That's the news. The number of continuing unemployment claims is now at 2.78 million, and that is down 22,000. So you see what we're saying here. 310,000 people signed up last Saturday. Overall, 2.78 million now getting some kind of unemployment benefit insurance. And you know, that's pretty good. It does suggest, and I can only just say it like that, it just suggests that maybe people are starting to go back to work now. Maybe some people have just given up looking for work altogether. Maybe they just can't be bothered anymore. You just really never know. But the background, of course, is that last Friday we had the appalling jobs report. Now, this is the government job report. They call it the non-farms. Comes out on the first Friday of every month. And last Friday, economists have been looking for 700,000 new jobs, and they got a measly little 200,000. And everyone was very upset about that. And the markets tumbled sharply on Friday. And then Monday, when we weren't here for Labor Day, all around the world, the markets were going up because they assumed that the Federal Reserve would push back tapering because of that awful number. You know, it's very difficult to call these markets. Very difficult indeed. Today, the market is up, as you rightly say, based on this jobless number. Tomorrow could be a different story.
It could, but I want to talk about tech stocks, because traders have been rushing to dump China tech stocks. What's their game?
Well, yeah, well, they have been. And of course, the Nasdaq has been on a bit of a tear, you know. It's been on a 4-day tear, and this is basically because this tapering is not likely to happen, or at least it may be pushed back. There's $120 billion going into government bonds from the central bank and the Treasury at the moment, and if that continues, then there are going to be sectors of this economy that are continue to be buoyant, and that has been the techs over at the Nasdaq. Now, what happened yesterday was that the ADRs, that's the China stocks that trade here, the American depository receipts, tumbled very, very sharply, and I have some numbers for you. Here we go. Alibaba, which is not really directly affected, actually, but it's a key Chinese stock, down 3%, and it's down 1.7% now. JD.com, down 2% yesterday, down 1.4% now. Baidu, down 2%. It's up almost 1% now. Pinduoduo down 3% yesterday. It's down 0.6% now. And the two that were really affected were Tencent, which was down 8% in Hong Kong and is now down 3%, and NetEase, which is down 11% and is now down 2.6%. It's a $60 billion rout, this, and it's happened simply because it is reported that Beijing called in some of these companies, Tencent and NetEase especially, and sort of wagged a finger and reminded them of the new restrictions on the kiddywinkles playing on their games, which is going on in China at the moment. And also the South China Morning Post, which, by the way, has a fantastic business team. They're also reporting that there is a temporary freeze with some of these companies now on the development of new games. So for that reason, the stocks have been falling. But what's interesting is recently the ADRs have been invested in by Wall Street because they got to a price point where people couldn't resist, and the adults in the room realized that whatever happens, it's unlikely that these companies are actually ever going to completely go away. They'll always likely be there because they're such big and exciting companies. You know, Wall Street thought that the crackdown, as we call it here, was beginning to cool off. Well, yesterday they had a bit of a shock. We'll see where we are tomorrow.
We certainly will. John Terrett, always good to see you. John Terrett in New York.
Coming up on CGTN, frantic attempts by Afghans in the UK to save relatives trapped in Afghanistan as the Taliban completes its takeover.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, making last clear. we can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Juliet Mann and me, Robin Dwyer. Our top story. Leaving the Taliban behind. First charter flight out of Afghanistan takes off from Kabul.
Since the Taliban took over Afghanistan, the British government has rescued thousands of people and brought them to the UK. But still, many British Afghan families are desperately trying to get their relatives out of the country. Nicole Johnston met some of them in London.
All day, hundreds of British Afghans arrive at this charity in West London. They have relatives and friends back in Afghanistan, and they're desperate to bring them to the UK. But the reality is, trying to get them out right now is almost impossible.
The expectation of the people is very high. When they come to the centre and fill the forms, they think that by next week we will bring their families from Afghanistan, which I completely understand about their emotion, about their anxiety.
Karim Rasool drove from Manchester to London to visit the Afghanistan and Central Asia Association. Its volunteers are taking the details of people with relatives stuck in Afghanistan and passing them on to local politicians and then the Home Office. Karim has lived in the UK for 20 years and now wants to bring his sister, Abdullah, here.
She always crying, non-stop. I swear when she's crying too, I feel very, very, so it's...
The family is originally from the Panjshir Valley, the last holdout of resistance to the Taliban. This week, the Taliban claimed full control of the region, but resistance fighters say they still hold strategic positions. Do you think the Taliban has changed at all?
No, no, never change.
So far, the British government has evacuated 15,000 Afghans to the UK. Around 8,000 are eligible to stay because they worked for the British military or the government. Others will arrive as part of a new settlement scheme for Afghans. And this organisation is taking donations from businesses and the community to help them.
So far, this charity has delivered 2 container loads of food, clothes, toys, toiletries and baby products to newly arrived Afghan refugees. These families are staying in quarantine hotels all over the country, and many of them arrived with absolutely nothing. So they're starting their lives all over again.
Tul and the family have a 4-hour drive ahead of them. He says he'll do whatever it takes to get his sister out of Afghanistan, but understands it could take years. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
Some students in Afghanistan are returning to school as the new term begins. With the new Taliban government now in power, Swan Chen looks at how different student life is.
Boys and girls in the same classroom. Female teachers taking classes. The junior years of the GAM School of Excellence in downtown Kabul appears to be unaffected by the political turmoil that has engulfed Afghanistan. It reopened its doors to students less than 2 weeks ago.
The Ministry of Education said students of grade 1 to 6 can return, so we have resumed the operation of the elementary department.
The school was forced to shut down amid the chaos in the Afghan capital as the Taliban took over. However, older children attending its middle school and high school departments are still waiting for the green light from the new interim government to reopen. And those who've resumed their schooling aware their future education hangs in the balance.
I hope Afghanistan can be peaceful and secure and we can study as normal. I hope schools will stay open and I can become a doctor and serve the country.
University studies in Afghanistan have also resumed this week. Attendance is strikingly low, with many students either afraid to return or having fled the Taliban's takeover. During the hardline Islamic group's rule in the 1990s, girls were banned from school and women were denied employment. So it's a relief for many female students that they can still attend classes. But they have to wrestle with new restrictions, including segregation from their male classmates.
It was better in the past. What's going to be solved through a curtain? The girls and boys are together in the halls. They are together in the streets.
Female students now must only be taught by female teachers or older men and use a separate entrance. They must also end their lessons 5 minutes earlier than men to stop them from mingling outside. The wearing of hijabs is mandatory.
This situation will harm women more. It will have a severe negative impact on their motivation to study, and they will feel that tomorrow they will be treated in the job market the same way.
The Taliban has repeatedly said in recent weeks that women's rights will be honored in accordance with Islamic law. What that means in practice will be closely monitored by the international community, which has urged the group to uphold its commitments to human rights in return for aid and recognition. Xuan Chen, CGTN.
Poland's Senate has rejected a planned law on foreign ownership rules on media firms. The proposed legislation would have amended Poland's Broadcasting Act, preventing companies from outside the European Economic Area taking control of Polish radio and television stations. Penelope Liesch is in Budapest. Penny, what will the impact of this ruling be?
Well, it's not over yet. While the Senate has rejected this reform so far, it's now likely to go back to the lower house, where the ruling Law and Justice Party that brought the reforms forward in the first place is holding on to a very thin majority. So the rejection could still be overruled, but it does seem to be a sign that Polish politicians are moving against these reforms that have been heavily criticised by politicians within the country, but also the international community. It would essentially mean broadcasters can't be owned by companies with headquarters outside the European Economic Area, and it is seen by critics to be targeting specifically TVN, an independent US-owned television station that has one of the most popular news channels in the country and is often critical of the government. The Law and Justice Party say it was designed to make the media fairer, but the United States, as one of Warsaw's biggest allies, has previously warned the government not to pass this legislation and make these changes, which could potentially lead to TVN 24 losing their licence later in this month when it's due to expire. It's unknown whether they'd be guaranteed some sort of extension, but it is likely, if this was to pass, that it would severely impact trade and other international relations with the United States. So it does seem to be that the mood is potentially moving away from these reforms, but it's certainly not over yet.
Well, staying with international relations, the Polish president was in Budapest today. What was discussed?
Well, the Polish president meeting with his counterpart Janusz Ada. High on the agenda was migration. These two very close allies share a strong anti-migration stance. Poland at the moment facing issues on its borders with Belarus. They accuse the Belarusian government of sending thousands of migrants towards the European Union and currently have imposed a state of emergency there to try and deal with that situation. Now, during this meeting, it was made clear by the Polish side that they will follow some of the examples set by Hungary in 2015, where they took a very strong anti-migration stance when thousands of people were trying to reach the European Union through Hungary, building a large fence on the border with Serbia. Poland is currently doing that at the moment. We've also seen over the last 24 hours a lot of Hungarian politicians and the government itself coming out in support of its closest ally, Poland, who earlier this week were called out by the European Commission, which is moving to try and fine the government for not moving quickly enough to dismantle a judge's disciplinary chamber, which is seen to be exerting political control over the justice system. Hungary saying that that is an arrogant and unacceptable move by Brussels. Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister, even saying that Hungary will look at whether it can take court action within the European court system against Brussels. So Warsaw and Budapest again at loggerheads with the European Union over many issues. This is just one of them, and it's unlikely we'll see the end to any of those anytime soon.
Penelope Liesch in Budapest, thank you for the update.
Beijing has blamed anti-China forces for a tribunal being held in London into alleged human rights abuses in Xinjiang.
China's ambassador to the UK and officials from the autonomous region said the non-governmental hearings risked destabilising the mutual interests of both countries, as CGTN's Paul Barber reports.
Undermining trust and goodwill as China-UK relations reach a critical juncture. That was how Chinese ambassador to Britain, Zheng Zheguang, characterised the UK Uyghur Independent People's Tribunal, which is due to resume hearings in London this week. It was set up last year at the request of the World Uyghur Congress with assistance from an NGO. Well, Western countries, including the United Kingdom, have accused China of imposing forced labour camps, birth control, family separation and the erasure of Muslim Uyghurs' religious identity in Xinjiang, with the United States calling it genocide. At a live-stream press event with the Chinese embassy here in London, officials and experts from Xinjiang rejected all human rights abuse allegations as groundless and malicious. Testimonials described the camps as vocational training centres to teach language and job skills. The officials denied accusations of genocide and said government actions in Xinjiang had boosted economic development and combated radicalism. Ambassador Zheng said that before coming to the UK, he had visited Xinjiang and was impressed by the quality of life and economic development. He called on the British government to stop the tribunal hearings or risk hurting the interests of both countries.
So it is our hope that China and the UK will work closely together towards the same direction to implement faithfully the common understanding between leaders of our two countries, to focus on positive cooperation and to deal with differences properly on the basis of mutual respect.
He and the other officials described the London tribunal as having no legal basis and that so-called expert witnesses were rumour-mongers bent on smearing China.
They have ideological bias deeply rooted in their minds. They look at everything in Xinjiang with a tinted glass. And actually, they have a hidden agenda in their minds.
In recent times, China and Britain have traded barbs as well as sanctions on individuals over the Xinjiang allegations. It isn't clear if these hearings will lead to a shift in policy or to further sanctions on either side. They almost certainly won't lead to warmer rhetoric. Paul Barber, CGTN, London.
It's been almost 18 months since the coronavirus pandemic forced many people to shift to remote working. With vaccinations rising and infection rates dropping in the United States this spring, hopes were mounting that a return to the office would happen by September. But the Delta variant has upended many of those plans. Karina Huber has more.
Labor Day was supposed to mark the return to the office for many U.S. workers, but the Delta variant has derailed some of those plans.
Delta variant is shifting the conversation away from we must get back to work to, oh my gosh, we have to think really critically about what work means now.
With rising infection rates in many parts of the United States, tech giants like Google, Amazon, and Apple have all told employees they aren't expected in the office until January 2022. Financial firms have been less flexible about remote working, with many of them, including Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan Chase, requiring workers return to the office this summer. But Wells Fargo, BlackRock, and some others have delayed the return to October. Cabral says workers have mixed reactions to the delays.
You've got the folks that were eager to get back that are really frustrated. And then you have the folks that are like, great, because I wasn't ready to go back into the office.
In cities like New York, the delayed return to normal is bad news for many of the businesses that cater to office workers.
There's been a big blow to restaurants. They were hanging on, waiting for September to come around, employees coming back to their offices. But Now many of these office buildings are still at less than 20% occupancy, and these local restaurants and bars rely on those workers to keep their doors open. So if they're not coming back, it's going to pose significant challenges.
It also poses significant challenges to the economy of New York City, which needs the return of Manhattan's roughly 1.2 million office workers to get things back on track.
Officials in some cities and states have mandated the vaccine for government workers. They hope more in the private sector will do the same to lower the risk of infection and encourage more people to return to the office. Karina Huber, CGTN.
France has warned the UK against financial blackmail after Britain said migrant boats could be turned back while crossing the English Channel. The UK government has confirmed that a border team's been training to intercept boats and send them back to France, but the plan still needs final approval. France's Interior Minister, Gérald Darmanin, said Britain must respect international commitments and not break maritime law. Migrant crossings from France to the UK have risen in recent months.
North Macedonia's government has held an emergency meeting after a fire gutted a COVID-19 field hospital, killing at least 14 people. The blaze happened overnight in the western city of Tetovo, where the hospital had been set up following a recent spike in infections. Prosecutors have launched an investigation and the death toll is expected to rise.
Pyongyang has celebrated the 73rd anniversary of the foundation of the DPRK with a nighttime parade. This year, the focus of the event was on symbols of the country's anti-coronavirus efforts. Kim Jong-un was in attendance to see the Worker Peasant Red Guards march through Kim Il-sung Square at midnight. The Guards are the country's largest civilian defence force and have around 5.7 million.
Unknown gunmen have reportedly raided a village in Nigeria's northern state of Kaduna, kidnapping about 18 people, including children. Nigeria has seen a wave of mass abductions, mostly occurring in its northern region. Correspondent Philahaza reports from Abuja.
Locals say the abductors attacked Kekebi village on the outskirts of Kaduna state capital in the wee hours of Monday night. The gunmen were riding on motorbikes and moved from house to house, taking children and their parents. A community leader confirmed the incident, saying the whereabouts of the victims remain unknown and the village is still traumatized by the attack. The police command in Kaduna is yet to comment on the matter. This is one of many attacks the country has witnessed recently. Since December last year, more than 1,000 students and scores of people across the northern states have been abducted. The Kaduna state government has, like and other neighboring states, has imposed strict measures for transportation. Motorcycles have been banned in many parts of the state and movements at odd hours restricted. Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has also ordered all the security chiefs to end kidnappings and other forms of insecurity across the country. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Still to come on CGTN, handle with care, assembling the world's largest magnet piece by piece.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Murray, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole,
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for the Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
The fight against poverty has suffered a setback.
We are at a turning point in history.
It's a world under great distress and disruption.
But solving the crisis is still possible.
Change is indeed coming.
Join me, Stephen Cole, for a special 1 hour-long show here on CGTN where we speak to some of the world's top leaders and experts standing on the front line of the fight against poverty.
It's a real mistake to think that the future is decided for us. We need dialogue.
We'll spark debate.
The biggest challenge is addressing inequality.
We'll explore the solutions.
This can be done, but it requires everybody working together.
And we'll showcase the success stories to reveal how the cycle of poverty can be broken. Innovation, action, change. Only on CGTN.
Welcome back. The pandemic has shown how fragile global food supply chains are, with many supermarkets and restaurants in almost every country having experienced food shortages.
At the same time, 1/3 of all food produced each year is wasted or spoiled before it can be eaten. That works out as an estimated $1.3 trillion worth. Yesterday, I spoke to Tessa Clark, who's the co-founder and CEO of Olio, which is a mobile app for food sharing aimed at reducing food waste.
Olio at its heart is a neighbour-to-neighbour food sharing app, and also you can use it to give away other household items too. Over the past couple of years, though, we have developed into a sort of a B2B offering whereby we enable large retailers and contract caterers to have zero food waste locations. And so how that works is we have 30,000 volunteers who collect and redistribute the unsold food at the end of the day from businesses such as Tesco, Compass Catering, Booker, Pret-a-Manger, etc. And our service enables those businesses to have zero food waste locations.
And the pandemic has really highlighted the issue of food insecurity, hasn't it? Why are initiatives like yours needed?
So unfortunately, we do have these twin evils of food waste and food insecurity coexisting and both growing very rapidly. Olio's solution is all about marrying together digital technology with empowered citizens within their local community. And that's an incredibly scalable way to solve both of those problems.
So we've seen gaps on the shelves in the UK due to supply problems with similar scenes in other countries. How can cutting food waste help?
So it's shocking to believe this, but globally, 1/3 of all the food we produce each year gets thrown away, and the same applies in the UK. So very simple logic, but if you were to throw away less food, then that would sort of flow back up through the supply chain and could play a really significant role in helping to relieve some of the pinch points that we've got.
So obviously not throwing away food is the key point, but what steps can businesses take to try and reduce waste? Is there an argument for losing use-by dates, for example?
We definitely think that there is some merit in revisiting date labelling, in particular looking at what products use-by dates are applied to. And a number of retailers in the UK have actually stopped putting use-by dates on certain products that could actually suffice with a best before date instead. And most certainly we have been part of conversations at an industry level, looking at best before dates and what value they really do add, or whether they contribute to greater confusion in this area. And as a result, we end up with more food waste than any of us want or need.
There's research suggesting that high-income countries waste as much food as sub-Saharan Africa actually produces. How do you think we can try and even out that inequality?
So you're absolutely right. The amount of food that's wasted in the Western world is shocking. So the food that we waste could, or a quarter of the food we waste, could feed all of the 800 million people who go to bed hungry each day in the world. And for businesses looking at food waste, the first thing I would recommend is to just measure your food waste throughout every step in your supply chain and operations. The next step then is to kick off a suite of projects to look at how you can reduce that food waste. And we are finding that many businesses are reaching the inevitable conclusion, which is that they need to work with Olio and our sort of hyper-local community-based solution if they want to achieve that final step, which is getting to zero food waste stores and locations. And that is critical because businesses are on the race to net zero. They're trying to implement their ESG goals. And just as importantly, their customers and their employees are calling time on food waste.
It powers the sun and the stars and is a potential source of safe, green and virtually limitless energy. Scientists say they're getting ever closer to harnessing nuclear fusion.
And on Thursday, a crucial component arrived at an experimental reactor in southern France, the first piece of the world's biggest magnet. Ross Cullen was there.
At 1 o'clock in the morning, in the southern French countryside, a precious convoy heads into a construction site. Inside this container, part of what is going to be the world's biggest magnet. And it's going to be put to work here at the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, or ITER. The goal of this scientific megaproject is to show that fusion energy on Earth can do what the sun does in space and provide infinite green power. To prove this, massive magnets are needed to generate an extremely powerful field to control an energy-producing plasma that is hot, intensely hot.
If all goes to plan, that plasma will be steered and shaped just behind me at a temperature of 150 million degrees Celsius, but weighing just 1 gram.
If you take 1 gram of fusion fuel, it's equivalent, I believe, to something like 8,000 tons of fossil fuel.
Tim Luce is the chief scientist at ITER. He says that this project's success would mean that we would have a near-endless, worldwide form of renewable power.
You've found an energy source whose fuel supply is uniformly distributed. It's not isolated to a certain geography or a certain political domain. So everybody on Earth will have access to the fuel. We've retired the risk of whether it's possible. It is possible. They've demonstrated it. We had a factory acceptance test. It's here. It's physically here, so we can start installing it. So this is exciting.
There are 7 strategic partners involved in building, testing and running the facility. The US, the EU, Russia, India, Japan, South Korea and China. Min Liao is the head of the magnets department at ITER, and she says international cooperation will be key, including from China.
I think China is willing to cooperate and to make a joint effort for this key breakthrough contributor for this project.
Some experts think the huge cost and difficulty of designing and running fusion reactors make them unlikely to ever be a mainstream energy source. But the physicists, engineers and designers at ITER hope to show that the idea of recreating the energy that powers our star, creating a plasma 10 times hotter than the core of the sun, is far from science fiction and is in fact science fusion, bringing the power of the sun down to Earth. Ross Cullen, CGTN at ITER in southern France.
Some gentle encouragement had to be given to 3 giant Galapagos tortoises to help them move pens at London Zoo this week. A crowd came out to see Dolly, Polly and Priscilla make their hour-long trip across the city's Regent's Park to their new homes. The zookeepers had to cover the path ahead of them with snacks of cucumbers, carrots and watermelons. That's what I like. But to see who crossed the finish line first, go to europe.cgtn.com.
Well, that is it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, on Facebook and Instagram.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.